Muscle loss after 40 is not inevitable, but it does require a bit more of an intentional approach than it did before. A lot of people are inadvertently working against themselves without knowing it. Cardio and strength training can exist together, but you have to be really careful about how you put those together. The type, timing, and duration of cardio has a real impact on MPS. Welcome to the Vitality Choice. I'm your host, Christine Costello, wellness educator, founder of a science-backed supplement brand, and someone who has spent decades studying and applying the science of what allows the body to stay strong, energized, and resilient through midlife and beyond. This podcast is about rewriting the narrative on aging. Each week we explore the everyday choices that shape how we age, from strength and metabolism to nutrition, mindset, recovery, and connection, so you can live stronger, healthier, and more vital at any age. Because aging isn't the problem, decline is. And when you understand how your body actually works, you can make the choices that allow you to age powerfully. So let's dive in. In episode 3, I told you that muscle doesn't just decline because you're getting older. It declines because your body stops receiving what it needs to keep it. The process I'm talking about is called muscle protein synthesis. It is the mechanism by which you keep and build muscle and is truly something everyone, not just bodybuilders, should be aware of as they age. I'll attempt to break it down today so that by the end of this episode, you'll understand why it matters to you as you age, and more importantly, you'll know exactly what you need to do to turn it on. This is the one process that governs whether your body will continue to hold onto its strength or allows your muscle to decline and let frailty enter the picture. We all deserve to stay mobile, vital, and resilient into old age. I love spending time with you discussing strategic ways we can do just that. This isn't something we often think about when we're younger, but holding on to and building muscle is the cornerstone for maintaining a strong and functional body. I'm also going to address two things that affect muscle protein synthesis: intermittent fasting and cardio, because both can have an impact on the quality of MPS. So let's dig in. Your muscle tissue is not static, it is constantly in a state of turnover, breaking down and rebuilding. Every single day, your body is tearing down old or damaged muscle proteins and replacing them with new ones. Muscle protein synthesis is simply the rebuilding side of that equation. It's the process by which your body takes protein from the food you eat, breaks it down into amino acids, and uses those amino acids to build new muscle, repairing what was broken down, and when conditions are right, adding just a little bit more. So let's think of it like a construction crew. Breakdown is the demolition, synthesis is the build. And what you're aiming for, especially after 40, is to make sure the building is consistently outpacing the demolition. So when synthesis consistently exceeds breakdown, you maintain or build muscle. When breakdown consistently exceeds synthesis, which is what happens when the right elements aren't present, you lose it. It's as simple as that. I know some of you are thinking, I'm not trying to build muscle, I just want to maintain what I have. And that is a completely valid goal, and quite honestly, is where I'm at right now. I've built the muscle that I want. My goal now is to maintain what I have and build strength. Muscle protein synthesis is just as critical for maintenance as it is for building, though. And I'm sharing this with you because there are ways to optimize this process. Your body doesn't have a hold steady mode. It's always either building or breaking down. It's always in flux. The reason muscle can feel stable over time is because synthesis is consistently meeting or slightly exceeding breakdown, not because the process stopped. If you stop providing your body the building blocks that trigger synthesis, adequate protein, meaningful resistance, quality, recovery, breakdown doesn't pause just because your goal is maintenance. It keeps running, and muscle breakdown becomes inevitable. And that is definitely what we don't want. So whether you want to build strength or simply keep what you have, that same process governs the outcome. The difference is only in degrees, how strong the building blocks need to be and how often. MPS isn't just for people chasing gains. It's for anyone who wants to keep their body working for them. What you may not realize is how much control you actually have over this process. The rate of muscle protein synthesis isn't fixed, it's responsive. It goes up and down based off of what you eat and how you train, how you sleep, and how much stress you're carrying. Muscle protein synthesis, or MPS, as I'll keep calling it, is trainable and it's addressable and it responds at any age. Lately, my Instagram feed has been full of people in their 80s and 90s breaking lifting records and speed records, yet they didn't start training until their 70s. For me, it's been really inspiring to see what is possible, bucking the popular belief that aging means frailty. It is possible to build from wherever you're at and at whatever age. So, if MPS is so responsive, why does muscle loss actually accelerate after 40? The answer really comes down to something researchers call anabolic resistance. When you're younger, in your 20s and early 30s, your body is highly sensitive to the building blocks that trigger muscle protein synthesis. A relatively modest amount of protein combined with fairly modest physical effort is enough to kick the process into gear. Unfortunately, after 40, that sensitivity decreases. So those lucky guys when we're younger doesn't happen when we're older. Your body still responds, it absolutely does, but the threshold changes. The building blocks have to be stronger and clearer to produce the same result. So let's use a real analogy here because I think it's the most useful way to understand this. Think about an old radio. When the dial sits right where it should, the station comes in clear. Get a little hair off the mark and that station turns to static. The music is still playing, you just aren't tuned into it anymore. So, anabolic resistance is just like that dial drift. Age pushes the signal out of range. The dial just needs an adjustment so that the static can clear. It's the same with us as we age. It's why we can eat what we've always eaten, do the exercises we've always done, and still find that maintaining muscle gets a lot harder. It's not that nothing is working, it's that the threshold shifted and the old approach no longer clears it. I experienced a version of this in a way that was really hard to ignore. In my 40s, I was competing as a natural figure athlete. And even though my body fat was very low and I was training consistently, eating carefully, and I looked really healthy from the outside, something wasn't quite right. My hormones were a mess. I was always cold. I was wearing sweaters in 110-degree Arizona heat. I had lost my period. I was bruising from the lightest contact. And despite all the training, my body was not holding onto the muscle. And I was getting basically diminishing returns because I had unknowingly created a hormonal environment that worked against the synthesis. When I finally stopped competing and shifted my approach, better recovery, better protein distribution, less cortisol, basically less stress, my body started responding differently. I got stronger. I was able to optimize my body's response, and muscle building once again got turned on. Muscle loss after 40 is not inevitable, but it does require a bit more of an intentional approach than it did before. So, what does it actually take to trigger MPS after 40? There are three things, and they have to work together. So, the first trigger is eat enough protein and enough leucine. Protein is the raw material, and without it, the construction crew has nothing to work with. But there is a nuance. It's not just about how much total protein you eat in each day, it's about how much you eat per meal, and specifically whether you're hitting a critical threshold of an amino acid called leucine. Leucine is the key that really starts the engine. Think of leucine as the signal that tells your body there is enough high quality protein here to make muscle building worth doing. Without leucine, MPS doesn't fully turn on, even if your daily protein totals look fine. After 40, the research suggests you need roughly 2.5 to 3 grams of leucine per meal to reliably trigger your MPS. And to hit that threshold, most adults over 40 need 30 to 40 grams of high quality protein per meal. So, to give you a sense of what that looks like, 30 grams of protein is roughly 4 to 5 ounces of chicken or fish, about 5 eggs, or a high quality protein shake with added leucine. That does sound like a lot, and for many people, it really is, especially at breakfast, where many people eat the least protein of their day. I'll do a full episode on protein distribution coming up, but for now, the key insight is this. The question isn't just, am I eating enough protein? It's, am I eating enough protein per meal to actually trigger the process? And most people, including myself, had never really thought about that. So the second trigger is mechanical tension. The muscle has to be challenged. Protein gives the crew the materials, but they need a reason to show up. And that reason is resistance, specifically placing the muscle under enough load and holding it there long enough that the body senses it needs to adapt. After 40, the effort needs it to be more meaningful than it did before. Light movement and casual activity, while valuable for a lot of different reasons, aren't usually sufficient to trigger meaningful muscle protein synthesis on their own. The muscle needs to be challenged and fatigued, asked to work near its capacity. What that looks like in practice varies enormously from person to person. For someone new to strength training, it could just be body squats where you're near fatigue and can absolutely provide enough resistance. For someone who has trained for years, like myself, it requires progressive overload, consistently adding challenge over time. The point isn't what the weight is. The point is that you really have to work hard enough to convince the body that strength is still needed and required for your life. So let's talk about cardio, because this is where a lot of people are inadvertently working against themselves without knowing it. Cardio and strength training can exist together, but you have to be really careful about how you put those together. Cardiovascular fitness matters enormously for longevity and heart health, but the type, timing, and duration of cardio has a real impact on MPS. And this is a nuance that so many people have never been taught. It took me a while to learn this too. So long duration, steady state cardio performed immediately after resistance training can blunt the MPS response to that training. This is sometimes called the interference effect, when you put significant endurance work right next to your strength work. And so that's where everything competes together. Those signaling pathways basically have interference, and the muscle building process gets weakened. And then duration matters. 20 to 30 minutes of moderate zone 2 cardio has a far smaller interference effect than 60 to 90 minutes. And then the intensity also matters. Lower intensity, steady state cardio is more disruptive to MPS than shorter, moderate intensity work. And timing also matters. Same session cardio and lifting creates more interference than separating them by several hours or on different days. And then let's talk about high intensity interval training, or HIIT. This can be highly effective and is generally less disruptive to MPS than long, steady state cardio. But when done too frequently or with inadequate recovery, it generates a significant cortisol or stress response, and elevated cortisol actively promotes muscle breakdown. So cardio and MPS, the practical guidelines. Let's separate the cardio from the strength training by at least 6 hours whenever possible, or at least do them on different days. If you must combine them in one session, do your lifting first. Keep your cardio under 30 minutes and reserve your longer cardio sessions for days when resistance training isn't happening. Treat HIIT as a training stressor that requires recovery, not a daily add-on. Cardio doesn't fight muscle, but poorly timed, excessive, or unrecovered cardio does. So then trigger 3, recovery. This is actually where the building process happens. You've heard me say this before, and I'll keep saying it. Muscle really isn't built during your training, it's built during your recovery. So training provides all the building blocks that you need, the protein provides the material, but recovery is where the construction crew actually does the work. So specifically, MPS peaks during sleep, particularly during deep, slow wave sleep. Your growth hormone is released, your tissue repair accelerates, inflammation is regulated, and so sleep deprivation is so damaging to muscle maintenance, not just because you feel tired, but because the actual rebuilding process gets cut short. It's also why spacing your training sessions matters. After 40, your muscles need more time between sessions to complete their repair cycle. If you train too frequently without the adequate recovery, you can't build more muscle. It just interrupts the process repeatedly. So recovery really isn't optional. It's a critical part of the program. Now that you understand what triggers MPS, let me walk through the most common patterns that keep it from working. So eating protein only at dinner. This is probably the most widespread pattern. A light breakfast, a moderate lunch, and then most of the day's protein packed into one evening meal. So the problem is that MPS doesn't work like a savings account. Your body can only use so much protein at once to stimulate the rebuilding process. And when the threshold isn't reached earlier in the day, these hours represent windows where MPS isn't being triggered and muscle breakdown goes unchecked. So, distribution actually does matter, especially after 40. Aim to hit adequate protein at every meal, not just the last one. And then let's talk about intermittent fasting, the nuance we often don't hear. This subject is a bit tricky to navigate, so I want to be really clear about what I'm saying and what I'm not. Intermittent fasting has real research supported benefits. It can improve insulin sensitivity, support autophagy, and reduce systematic inflammation. And for many people, simply eating in ways that help. It is a useful tool, but it does have some less often talked about effects. Fasting means extended periods without protein entering the body, and extended periods without protein also means extended periods where MPS isn't being triggered and well, muscle protein breakdown continues. So after 40, with anabolic resistance in play, that compensation is so much harder to work with. Longer fasting windows and compressed eating windows make hitting both the total protein target and the per meal leucine threshold much more difficult. And the research actually is mixed. Some studies show muscle can be maintained with intermittent fasting while protein is sufficient. Others show accelerated lean mass loss, particularly in older adults. So if you fast and you're prioritizing muscle, just pay attention to the details of that. And if you practice intermittent fasting, compress the time, not the protein quality. Every meal in your eating window needs to hit the 30 to 40 gram threshold. Prioritize protein at your first meal to interrupt overnight breakdown as quickly as possible. And track honestly. If your total protein is falling below your evidence based target, the fast may be costing you muscle that you're not even aware you're losing. Fasting is a tool. It works well when it's the right fit for your goals, and less well when it's in conflict with them. Choosing protein sources that are low in leucine. Not all proteins are equal when it comes to triggering MPS. So, the winners, of course, are animal based proteins, and they tend to be naturally high in leucine and highly effective at triggering MPS. Plant based proteins can absolutely be part of a muscle supportive diet, and they have been shown to work for a lot of people, but they tend to be lower in leucine and lower in bioavailability, meaning you need more volume, and combining your sources do matter. So, if you're plant based, work on ways to improve the leucine content of your protein sources. And then training without enough challenge. Consistency is great, but if you've been doing the same workout at the same intensity for months or years, your body has actually adapted, and that adaptation means that your body is not challenged enough to synthesize new muscle. Progressive challenge matters, not necessarily heavier weight, but more resistance, more weight reps, slower tempo, or less rest between sets. So there's multiple ways that you can get there. And then chronically undersleeping. So 6 hours sometimes feels like enough when you're busy, but at 6 hours, the deep sleep phases where MPS peaks actually get cut short. And over time, this creates an accumulation of muscle loss that people often attribute to aging when it's actually just sleep deprivation. 7 to 9 hours is a biological requirement for muscle maintenance after 40. And then high chronic stress. This is cortisol, the primary stress hormone, and it is very catabolic. It promotes the breakdown of muscle tissue. And when cortisol is chronically elevated from work pressure, poor sleep, underfueling, or overtraining, it actually works against MPS. And that's why someone who can train hard, eat protein, and still struggle to maintain muscle. And if the stress load is high enough, breakdown keeps outpacing the rebuilding. Managing stress isn't just a mental health practice, it's really a muscle maintenance strategy. And then let's talk about a few supplements that are worth knowing about in the context of MPS, particularly after 40. Leucine, which we've talked about, itself can be supplemented directly, and adding leucine to a lower protein meal is one way to ensure the threshold is actually being met, even when your food sources are limited. So, this is particularly relevant for intermittent fasting practitioners who need every meal to do just a little bit more work. And then creatine, the most studied supplement on the planet, it supports the energy systems that fuel resistance training, meaning it helps you do higher quality work in a session, which translates to a stronger mechanical tension signal for MPS. And then HMB, it actually specifically helps reduce muscle protein breakdown. It doesn't actually trigger MPS directly, but by slowing breakdown, it shifts the balance in the right direction, particularly when you're doing those fasting windows, when you're traveling, or when you're ill. So they're not magic bullets, but they do reduce the friction that often happens when your training is disrupted or your stress is high or protein intake is harder to optimize. They are support tools, they're not the shortcuts, but they are something that you can utilize. So, 4 concrete things you can take away from today. First, just really audit your protein per meal, not just per day. Take one day this week and look at how much protein you're getting at each meal. If breakfast is under 20 grams and dinner is carrying most of the protein, that's most likely a distribution problem and something you can fix and tweak. Second, if you fast, audit your eating window. Within each eating window, ask yourself, am I actually hitting 30 or more grams of protein per meal, or am I compressing both the time and the protein? If your fasting practice is serving your health goals, go ahead and protect it, but make it work with your muscle, not against it. And third, look at where your cardio sits relative to your strength training. If you're regularly doing both in the same session, try experimenting by separating them. Even a few hours between sessions reduces interference. If you can't separate them, at least lift first. And then fourth, protect your sleep like it's part of your training plan because it actually is. If you're regularly getting under 7 hours, pick one thing you can shift to gain 30 extra minutes, one earlier bedtime, one less thing in the evening, and then compound that over weeks, and the impact is real. So, this episode really did cover quite a bit of ground, and I hope you found it useful. If you must start small, pick just one thing from the list, just one, and start there. That's how this works. One small decision made consistently, compounding into something real over time. I've seen it happen, I've lived it, and I believe it's possible for you. Now, next episode, we're going to stay in the nutrition conversation and tackle something that trips up almost everyone in midlife: protein. Not whether to eat it, but how much, what kind, and why many people over 40 are eating significantly less than their body actually needs. I'll give you real numbers, a simple way to calculate your target, and a clear picture of what adequate protein actually looks like meal by meal. It's one of the most actionable episodes that I'll do, and I think it's going to shift how you look at every meal. So until then, your body is listening. Make sure you're sending the right message. Thanks for spending this time with me today on the Vitality Choice. If this episode resonated with you, I'd love for you to follow the show so you never miss an episode. And if you know someone who wants to stay strong, capable, and independent as they age, share this episode with them because how we age matters, and the choices we make today shape the life we live tomorrow. I'll see you next week.